The US has announced that Ukraine and Russia have agreed to a ceasefire in the Black Sea following 3 days of talks in Riyadh. However, the significance of the deal is in question.
Top national security officials for U.S. President Donald Trump discussed war plans in a Signal group chat that mistakenly included a prominent journalist. At least 23 people were killed in overnight Israeli airstrikes on Gaza, Palestinian medics said on Tuesday.
The US has announced that Ukraine and Russia have agreed to a ceasefire in the Black Sea following 3 days of talks in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. In separate but nearly identical statements, the White House confirmed Kiev and Moscow will ensure safe navigation, eliminate the use of force, and prevent commercial vessels from being used for military purposes. Ukraine's Defense Minister Rustem Umerov clarified Kiev's position, warning that any movement of Russian military vessels outside the eastern Black Sea would violate the agreement. Meanwhile, senior Russian official Grigory Karasin described the talks as very interesting, difficult, but quite constructive. Both countries also pledged to develop measures to ban strikes against energy facilities. These discussions did not involve direct talks between Ukrainian and Russian officials. While the US committed to helping Ukraine secure prison exchange, civilian releases, and the return of forcibly transferred children, it promised Moscow assistance in restoring access to global markets for agricultural and fertilizer exports. Questions remain about the deal's significance as Russia no longer holds a military grip in the Black Sea, and the Romanian corridor already ensures safe passage for civilian cargo ships.
Top national security officials for U.S. President Donald Trump discussed war plans in a Signal group chat that mistakenly included a prominent journalist. Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, wrote about his unprecedented experience on Monday, saying he didn't think it was real at first.
Sounded like the people I know who are in this administration. Nevertheless, it wasn't until Saturday that I was reasonably certain that this wasn't a hoax, that I had actually mistakenly been included in a conversation of the Principals Committee, essentially the leaders of the national security community, including the head of the CIA, in this discussion.
U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was one of the officials who had shared information in the group chat. After the story quickly spread, he tried to discredit Goldberg.
You're talking about a deceitful and highly discredited so-called journalist who's made a profession of peddling hoaxes time and time again, to include the hoaxes of Russia, Russia, Russia, or the fine people on both sides hoax, or suckers and losers hoax. So this is the guy that peddles in garbage. This is what he does.
Meanwhile, Trump claimed to be unaware.
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I think it's not much of a magazine, but I know nothing about it.
The story sparked concern among both Democratic and Republican lawmakers about how sensitive information could so easily leak. The National Security Council said the messages appeared authentic and added it was looking into how Goldberg's number was added to the chat.
Mass protests in Turkey continued for the 7th night on Tuesday as thousands of opposition supporters rallied outside Istanbul City Hall in support of the jailed mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu. Police dispersed the protesters who gathered waving flags and chanting slogans. Earlier, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan once again warned the protesters to know their limits.
Herkesi sınırlarını bilmeye, ölçüyü korumaya, hak arama ile hakaret ve vandallık arasındaki çizgiyi geçmemeye davet ediyorum. Sokaklarda terör estirenlerin, bu ülkeyi yangın yerine çevirmek isteyenlerin varacağı hiçbir menzil yoktur. Girdikleri yol çıkmaz sokaktır.
Meanwhile, the head of Turkey's main opposition party visited İmamoğlu in prison on Tuesday, where he held a 2-hour meeting. Arrested on 19 March on corruption charges, Ekrem İmamoğlu is seen as the main challenger to President Erdogan's 22-year rule. His arrest has sparked demonstrations in cities across the country.
Israel's parliament has passed a state budget securing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's governing coalition and granting him months of political stability amid growing public pressure over the war in Gaza. Protests erupted outside the Prime Minister's office and Knesset in Jerusalem, with demonstrators blocking roads and forcing ministers and legislators to walk to the parliamentary building. The rallies also called for negotiations to secure the release of hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. Opposition leader Yair Lapid condemned the budget, calling it theft and accusing the government of cutting the income and future of Israel's middle class while shamelessly exploiting those who work, pay taxes and serve in the military. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich criticized the protests, describing them as a bankruptcy of the rule of law, and urged police action against demonstrators blocking access to Knesset. The budget vote was a critical test for Netanyahu's coalition, which includes ultra-nationalist and ultra-Orthodox parties.
The top UN official in South Sudan warned the country is on the brink of a renewed civil war after the government postponed the latest round of peace efforts. UN Special Representative Nicholas Haysom said violence is escalating as elections approach and political competition between the country's president and vice president intensifies. Haysom noted the two sides don't have sufficient trust in each other to steer the nation towards a democratic path. South Sudan gained independence from Sudan in 2011 following decades of conflict. It descended into a civil war as forces loyal to the country's president and vice president clashed. The conflict claimed the lives of more than 400,000 people before a peace agreement was signed in 2018. While elections were initially set for 2023, they've been postponed twice and are now expected in 2026.
The European Union has urged Serbia to deliver on EU reforms after months of record-breaking protests in the country. The call to Belgrade came on Tuesday after President Aleksandar Vučić met with the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and the Council President, Antonio Costa, in Brussels. Vučić said the meeting addressed the current political situation in Serbia and its path towards EU accession.
Razgovarali smo pre svega o strateškom putu Srbije u Evropsku uniju i o tome koliko Srbija može i želi da bude posvećena. Ja sam rekao da će Srbija da bude apsolutno posvećena tom cilju i više nego što je bila do sada posvećena, ali sam rekao takođe da očekujem da uskoro ili imamo odluku o formiranju nove vlade ili imamo odluku o...
Last week, Vučić's planned meeting with the EU's bloc's leaders sparked controversy in Serbia when around 32 MEPs demanded in a letter that von der Leyen cancel the meeting. The Serbian leader has faced increasing pressure at home, with student blockades and protests that have persisted for more than 4 months. A group of protesters blocked traffic on several bridges in the center of Hungary's capital, Budapest, on Tuesday in opposition to a recent law that effectively bans LGBTQ+ pride events and restricts Hungarians' right to assembly. The protest, the second within a week, comes after Hungary's ruling Fidesz party used its 2/3 parliamentary majority last Tuesday to fast-track the controversial law.
Pride törvény nem arról szól, hogy betiltsák a Pride-ot. Az is egy mocsokság, az is egy disznóság, az is sok százezer ember jogát vonja vissza. De arról szól, hogy majd a következő neki nem tetsző tüntetéseket betilthassa, illetve arról szól, hogy ezeket a törvényeket könnyebben szankcionálhassa.
The new law amends Hungary's rules on assembly to make it an offense to hold or attend events that violate the country's contentious child protection legislation. Authorities say they may now use facial recognition tools to identify individuals that attend prohibited events. Several opposition parties in the country have condemned the law, but the recently formed center-right Tisza party, which according to several opinion polls is currently more popular, has described the issue as a distraction.
The European Commission and Parliament are trying to tackle the housing crisis across the EU. The situation is critical. Rising property prices combined with a shortage of available housing has made access to affordable housing for many incredibly difficult. Between 2010 and 2023, rents across the bloc rose by an average of 22% and property prices by almost 50%. The EU is particularly interested in the impact of short-term rentals, which account for almost a quarter of tourist rentals.
We are certainly looking at the role of short-term rentals. On one hand, it's a great possibility for people to go see each other's countries, for people to have an income to rent out a room or a home for a limited time. On the other hand, it does lead to huge problems in some cities where people are forced out more or less of their homes so that they become a business machine, so to speak, instead of being a normal home.
Measures on the table include the use of European funding for the construction of social housing, as well as the creation of a pan-European recruitment platform to tackle the shortage of construction workers. The Parliament recently set up a special committee on the EU housing crisis, which is expected to make recommendations to the Commission within a year. Its chairwoman insists that there is no one-size-fits-all solution to guarantee access to affordable housing in the EU.
There can be areas where the problem is more demand side, other areas where it's more of a supply side, the type of supply varies. There are places where new construction is unthinkable and you really need to work on existing infrastructure, retrofitting, renovation. There are areas where you could actually alleviate the problem by constructing. So I wouldn't have one-size-fits-all recipes.
The average age at which the majority of Europeans move out of their parents' home increased from 26 to 28, but housing is not directly controlled by the EU, meaning there is limited room to maneuver.